All right, I think, I remember there was a question here and a question here, and then we'll, and then, actually, Mark, maybe you can help me sort of keep track of who's asking, raising hands, so I call on everyone, but I think Jeff,
Sure.
if you want to.
First, excuse me. Got a cold. First of all, I just want to thank you for your work. My sense was that you all worked really hard on this, and that there's a lot of bright people, and you went out really respectfully and spent a lot of time asking people questions and trying to get input. So I hope that something good comes of this, and I want to thank you for it. So my question is it possible in a set of recommendations like this to address, say, the quality of jobs, that we're trying to create? Everybody's for growth. I'm for growth. But, average people haven't had a raise in about 30 years. So is there a way that a set of recommendations like this can address that issue? Or is that something, those are policy issues maybe outside the scope of this kind of a presentation?
I don't think it's completely out of the scope, but I think it's beyond, like maybe mentioning it and then, suggesting that that's an area for further study. I don't know that at this point we would get into a lot of depth with it, but I think just at least, again, a lot of it is about setting intentions and creating something that there's some overall community agreement on. So in that sense, I think we can at least incorporate some of that language into the final.
You want me to call on people?
Yes, that'd be great.
Gentleman right here.
Yeah, it's a simple question, but, I think it gets to the heart of a lot of, at least in the economic development and revitalization of downtown. Lynn, was there a survey performed in relationship to the number of square feet of building space in downtown and the number of square feet occupied and unoccupied? Because obviously demand is a market signal that there is a want to be in downtown. Lynn.
So I think that's an area that, to some extent, yes, we have analyzed, and to some extent, I think we can expand upon, as I mentioned earlier, the analysis of property characteristics, I think, actually helped to visually demonstrate what you were talking about, but we can also crunch some numbers associated with that. Don't try to read everything, because it'll be a little hard to read it on the screen. I mean, you're welcome to try, but I just think I'm telling you now that I know it's probably a little hard to read right here, but there were questions, for example, in our survey that we used volunteers with, where we asked questions about parking lots, for example. I mean, I think one of the things I've noticed is that everywhere you go as a planner, one of the first things people mention is, we need more parking. And then when you look at the numbers, more often than not, there's a surplus of actual parking spaces. And I think I remember having this impression when I was up on the hill by High Rock, looking at the sea of parking and thinking there is a lot of opportunity there. And so I think we can certainly kind of provide some of that analysis in words as well as visuals in the plan. I don't have that information crunched per se now, but I think just maps help to demonstrate it visually as well as some of the data behind it.
On the individual parcels, Manisha, do we know if it's occupied or unoccupied?
So we can make a determination of whether we think it's occupied based on
visual.
Well, no, but we also looked at assessors' data, and so, if you go to, this information is all public. If you go to the City of Lynn Assessors webpage, there's a link to a site called Patriot Properties, and you can actually look up individual properties on that website. What we're kind of adding on is that visual map element of it, because I think it's sometimes easier to see trends by seeing things in a map than if you have to pull up individual properties and look at things that way. But in the assessor's data, some of the analysis that we did of that data is, for example, you can look at property X. Well, you have the owner's name and mailing address, and then you have the address of the property. And if the address of the property matches up with the address of the mailing address, you have a sense of whether it's owner occupied. And some of the other things we looked at did it look like, I mean, so this is a limited, it's 434 properties in the area we drew for this project, which isn't a huge number. I mean, it's not a small number, but we could actually look at things one by one. And another thing we looked at was did it look like an individual person's name or like a trust or a limited liability company or something like that. And those aren't necessarily in and of themselves to make a judgment of, oh, well, this is better than the other. But I think when you start looking at all of those things together, you can start noticing some trends.
In the back.
So my thoughts have to do with residential development as well as owner occupancy versus renters here in the neighborhood. I'm a residential real estate broker here. There are 9 total condo loft buildings in downtown Lynn, and one of the things that I'm seeing repeatedly that really concerns me is the conversion of owner occupants is, really switching to renters. And we certainly want to have renters in the neighborhood, but obviously owner occupants have, a stronger vested interest. And part of the problem is that these loft buildings aren't meeting current lending guidelines because the developers who originally, rehabbed these buildings held on to too high of a percentage of units. So the investor concentration now is too high and people can't sell. So instead of putting their units on the market and selling to someone else who may purchase and become an owner occupant, what they're doing is they're renting the units. So the conversion of owners is really increasing in terms of having those numbers skewed. And I don't think it's a great thing for the downtown area to lose owners. So I don't know if there's something that's been presented or talked about in terms of incentives that the city can give not only to developers to make sure that when they come into the city and develop that they're letting go of the proper amount of units and not hanging on to too many, but also maybe incentives for residents to stay and not move on and rent their units. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think you're sort of talking about supports for existing homeowners to encourage them to stay, and maybe just the fact that those supports would be in place might encourage more home ownership. Not entirely sure how to address the issue of the changing balance. What I would say is, I think again, I know I keep saying it, but use the power within this room. We have folks within the room from the Department of Community Development, the Housing Authority, local developers, and real estate professionals who are all thinking about these issues from their different, pieces of the puzzle on a daily basis. I think one thing we could offer, again, is some of the data and the analysis of property characteristics could help maybe make the case for more supports to existing homeowners, for example. I don't know.
I would just ask a question if I could, Miss. Is the problem that the original developers held on to 20% of the units and now when they're selling them to renters? Or have they already been resold to owners and those owners are selling to renters?
So the problem is that the developer, there are 2 buildings in particular right now where the developer owns too high of a percentage of units. So because of that, the other owners, the individual owners, someone like myself, the buildings don't meet current financing guidelines because the investor concentration is too high.
Yes.
So owners like myself can't put our units on the market to sell to another potential owner who would buy and move in, but rather we're kind of stuck, and the only choice if we need to leave Lynn for whatever reason, maybe a relocation for a new job, we're having to rent our units.
And maintain ownership of those.
We retain ownership, but we're no longer living in the community.
Yep.
And again, renters add value also, but we're really seeing a lot of owners, leave the community because they can't sell.
So let me say two things. I think that one of the things you'll see in the recommendations is there are a number of specific recommendations that go along with a fairly consistent kind of MAPC philosophy, which is that we suggest that the city should really decide through zoning, through design guidelines, permitting procedures, etc., decide exactly what you want in different places, and then once you set those rules clearly, let developers go ahead and do those things. It seems to me like one area that we could explore going forward with you all is whether or not there are levels of owner occupancy that are appropriate for buildings that are going to be developed as condominiums, and mechanisms for actually maintaining that over time. Because I think that's consistent with say what you want. If you want a building that's going to be at least 60% owner occupied or 80% owner occupied, say that and then figure out a way to make that actually happen. Whether or not the specific legal mechanisms, I think the specific legal mechanisms are a little beyond the detail of this plan, but I'll tell you an interesting story in 1 minute, which is I used to actually serve in the legislature, and when I served in the legislature, Mayor Kennedy, who was not in politics at that point in time, worked with a whole group of people and me to strengthen the state's condominium laws, precisely because there were absentee owners in condominiums who weren't paying their condominium fees, and there was no way for the condominium to actually enforce that lien. We actually passed laws reforming that and strengthening condominium associations. So I have a feeling that if Mayor Kennedy and I get together on this issue again, we might be able to figure out a way to help deal with this question.
I think we had a couple on this side of the room, and then we'll come back.
So you touched a bit on zoning, and zoning is an incredible tool for urban planning. And you walk from the Lynn Way, and you see the beautiful DNA building, brand new, and across the street, I got nothing against tire shops, but across the street you got a tire shop. That's a problem that could be corrected maybe through zoning. Not immediately, because you got to get rid of the tire shop. But let's get creative about zoning. Let's get creative about linkage. Let's get creative about land swaps, for example. Maybe there's a piece of land that tire, vacant land that tire place can go to. Maybe there's a way that we can develop the corner of Monroe and Market, so that is it Monroe? Yeah. So that it doesn't empty out onto this vast wasteland of a parking lot. Add some vitality, add some diversity through zoning, and maybe overlay zones and linkages. So can you guys just talk briefly about what this plan says about working with Lynn for zoning?
Sure. So I think, you hit a lot of the points right on. For example, automotive uses is something that we have recommended that through zoning become not allowed, and then over time, promote or eliminate those uses over, probably a long period of time. But I think setting the intention for that, and along with that, I think design guidelines could be very helpful as well to maybe help existing properties, for example, fit more within the context, even if they're not quite the right use. They tend to apply probably more to new developments, but that's where maybe some other city programs or incentives could come in. The zoning recommendations. Yeah, I was just going to say. So the zoning piece of this is in two parts. There is the actual analysis piece, which details what we looked at and our what we saw as kind of the constraints and possibilities with those. And then under the Our Recommendations tab is where you can find the specific recommendations on those, and the smaller packet has the recommendations but not the analysis. So one of the things we heard at the community meeting also was, and also in our review of previous documents, is a desire for allowing housing development in downtown. So that is something we addressed in this as well. Many of you may know that in 2003 there was a amendment that allowed a residential reuse overlay district, which was a way of getting some more residents into downtown within existing buildings. And I think that was a really successful program, but it's sort of, now those opportunities are fewer. And I think what we've heard a lot from the community is that the desire for zoning is, the desire for market rate housing development or affordable housing development is something that people want to see in downtown. Just trying to think of if there's other, I'm going to go to the recommendation section actually. So this talks about specifically the zones we looked at, which is the entire central business district, the entire residential reuse overlay district, which is actually coincides with most of the central business district, the Sagamore Hill corridor overlay, Washington Street overlay, and I think if there was one example district that's been kind of more progressive in terms of zoning, the Washington Street overlay is a good example to look at. And then there's a few where we have a few parcels that are in the business, high-rise residential, or light industrial district. So that, if you go to that section, you'll kind of learn about the analysis end of things. And then under recommendations, we have, I think one of the overall recommendations is a lot of things in downtown require a special permit. So that actually makes it less predictable for potential developers to establish or want to invest time and money into downtown Lynn. And so we have some recommendations in regards to reducing the number of special permits. We recommend phasing out the residential reuse, but allowing new residential uses to come in. We also looked at some of the parking requirements. Right now, the parking requirements across the entire city are pretty uniform versus, what you would need for a downtown. And if you have, say, a one-bedroom or a studio loft, you don't necessarily need as much parking as you would for a single-family home in a different part of the city, for example. So I think if you want to get the specifics, that's in that section, and that is definitely a piece of this program or our recommendations that we went into quite a bit of detail on. And actually, I was going to say my colleague Matt Smith actually was the one who did a lot of that analysis, and he unfortunately is under the weather tonight, but I think this is pretty well in detail, but if there are specific thoughts or questions you have that one of us couldn't answer, which I think most of us would be able to, I will definitely make sure I get him in the loop to get back to everyone about.
This gentleman right here. This is excellent work, great time. But I am a realist, and I've been hearing this theme in one way or another since the 1970s. We had the Step Up with Lynn campaign. We had the Meet Me Downtown campaign. We're going to knock buildings down and we're going to have people downtown campaign. Your major theme throughout all this is the involvement of the citizens of Lynn. From Ward 1 all the way down to here, across through Saugus, through Salem. Unfortunately, Lynn is a very complex city. You even said it, okay? People in Ward 1 are not going to invest in downtown Lynn. People who live by Saugus are going to go up to Route 1. People over in Highland Avenue are going to go to Salem. Lynn is a very complex city with major issues. Mental health issues, the Leo building, they have the Willow Labs on Union Street. There was a guy last year from New Jersey, sold 100 kilos of cocaine.
There's drugs going on. Believe me, I love your enthusiasm. I love everything about it. South ran for Ward 5 council, sticks his head out. But the fact of the matter is, Lynn's stuck. Salem's grown. Linfield just built a beautiful mall. Saugus, everybody around Lynn is progressive and aggressive. How come Lynn is stuck in the doldrums? I've been hearing this, and believe me, great energy. This is my first time here. You know, what's going on? This is 1973, 68 all over again, since urban renewal, since suburbia started in the 50s. If you don't have the involvement in the community, nothing's gonna happen. Nothing. My wife and I, we have 2 kids in the City of Lynn school system. The school systems in Lynn are great. You know, I love it. Think simple. Think simple. What does Lynn doesn't have that other communities do have? They have the Gap. They get Target. No, serious. This is what's gonna bring people into Lynn.
Salem doesn't have those either.
Yeah, but they have a vision, and Salem knows what it is. Lynn has to get a vision. It has to know what it wants to be, and it has to stick with it, and it has to be aggressive and progressive. Sorry, I'm
No,
sorry.
I think you're.
I'm sorry.
So, in addition to what you said about community involvement, and I would agree with you that, you know, many of the things we're saying, or pretty much maybe all of them, have been said in some form or another over the years. That doesn't mean progress hasn't happened, but it also indicates that maybe things are a little stuck. I think I would argue another thing that the city has or doesn't have is there are a lot of really dedicated people working for the city. However, there isn't someone, and maybe I'm biased because, you know, I'm a planner, someone with a city planning background, like myself, for example. Like, I have a city planning degree. I've worked as a city planner at a city planning agency for a few years, and I think the vision sometimes a planner could bring, or the comprehensive nature of looking at things that a planner could bring to the city, might be something that the city might want to explore further. I know, again, this is not any sort of, I know the folks here at the city actually do a tremendous job and an amazing amount of work. I think the one thing I've noticed kind of over and over is that just that overall strategy and sense of how does it all fit together is sometimes where I get a little stuck, and my sense is that that could be one way to address it. Another part of this is sort of the first in the set of recommendations, are some other things that maybe the city could do with your encouragement as its constituents to kind of maybe make some of what they're doing a little more obvious to the community and get people more involved, but also kind of have that capacity to do higher, you know, the level of analysis that maybe some of the other communities are able to do. So that would be another part that I would add to what you're saying. Does anyone else want to respond?
Yeah, two things. First of all, kind of an answer to what you're saying. I remember when Charlestown and Boston waterfronts were a disaster. But what Boston did was it developed a plan. And Boston is really booming right now, which brings me to my second question. The fact that we have a plan is of the essence. Secondly, though, given our proximity to Boston and given our linkage there, these young people need to be thinking about the fact that there's a huge development going up at North Station. If with the community college and the schools and so forth, we get these kids ramped up to take those big jobs that are coming. They can then have the economic capacity right here in this town to begin to develop our city, because it's coming. It's coming. Some very exciting stuff is coming. We got a whole vacancy with General Electric.
Yeah, but you got a problem, and I said my 2 words were blue line. I work in downtown Boston. I work at the Charlestown Navy Yard. I have worked in Boston and Cambridge all my life. I live in Lynn. How do I get to work? I drive. Commuter rail's not convenient enough. Even Mike Dukakis got a lift home the other day. He was here. So, that's, I'm not going to say much more than that, but maybe our legislature should be working on getting the blue line back.
I will really quickly respond, and then I know Terry had a question, and I believe you had a question. So I'll get to you two next, and then whoever else. In terms of plans, yes, the city actually has some really great plans and is making, I think between the EDIC, Housing Authority, Community Development, Inspectional Services, Mayor's Office, a lot of those departments are actually, you know, if you look at what they've done, they're implementing those plans. And one of the things they talk about is how the waterfront master plan is sort of the guiding document the same way the South Boston waterfront developed. And with that, I'll turn it over to you next. Yeah.
I just had a comment about something that Soraya was mentioning about people not being able to, they can't release their units because they can't sell them for, they're underwater basically. Has there been any thought about incentives for people to move to be owner occupants in Lynn, such as a residential exemption on property taxes? That's my first question. My second question is, was a traffic study part of the work that you did? Because the downtown has a lot of one-ways, and I think that might be discouraging to people who want to visit Lynn, and they're afraid of the one-ways, so they just say, forget it, I'm not going there.
In terms of the one-ways, the city, I think, did undertake a traffic study about 9 or 10 years ago. And I believe it's available through the Community Development Department. I think the challenge for you all is to encourage implementation of that plan and maybe review of it to see if it's still what the community wants. The other thing I want to say is, you know, we can do a lot with this still. There's a few things we can address, but I think I'm really happy that we're developing this relationship. Our organization can be a resource for the community going forward to address things in the future.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.
First of all, there's something that I have kind of like something good to say. And this is my 2 cents, because I don't know where I will be tomorrow. But then what happens that, to me, while I was living in New York and having a girlfriend in Lynn, the most important thing ever, believe it or not, my only vision, my only goal was the green sign that says 44B, 095 North. When I saw that sign, all my tiredness went away. All I wanted to go see that beautiful lady sitting right here. And I wasn't tired after working all week. But then she said to me, I love you 23 years ago, but I'm not leaving Lynn. So, here I am. Happily married.
For you.
Yes. But then there's the situation
We
that
need more people like your wife to
That's right.
and I'm here and living at large and living happy. But then there's something that I want to bring out to you so you think about it, because I thought about it too. I do not go to a town to eat or to shop. I shop and eat because I am in that town already. I'm doing something. I play golf at the Gannon, but my driving range is in Saugus. I have to kayak in Beverly, and I have to go camping in Salem. My batting cage is in Middleton. So there's a lot of things that if we can just put a plan, like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10, there are a lot of things that we can start doing as Lynners, and we can start. I just love to see people loving Lynn. I mean, I love it, you know. I do love Lynn because it gave me the most, what I love the most. But then, if we have to find ways to make first Lynn people love Lynn, if we can help them see, and I suggest that we go back to the drawing board in the high schools. We have to sell the kids. Those kids are now 16, but they will be voting in 3 years, 2 years. Those kids that are now going to be the strength of the city, they're the youth. We have to go back to the schools. We have to go tell them what we're doing. We have to sell them the hope we have. And people is going to come. If Lynn goes global, the globe will come to Lynn. And there's one last thing I'm going to tell you is about parking, people. When downtown becomes vibrant, dynamic, connections and destination, and there will be no parking. Because you can just go to the Met or the MoMA and try to find parking there. So maybe we're going to have to get more buses to move people around. I'm Nathaniel Valenzuela, and I approve this message.
Gentleman over there.
So I'm not a city planner. I'm not like an expert in real estate or anything like that. So I have some questions. But at first, I'm hearing a lot of let's develop, let's add this, let's add that. Okay? But no one's really talking about what needs to be taken away. You know, I'm a nurse, so I think in terms of the human body. Okay? If you have cancer, what do you do with it? You cut it out. Okay? And no one's talking about that. And I think there needs to be a conversation about certain things that need to be taken away. And one of those things that really bothers me is that homeless shelter down the street from me. And I don't want to sound insensitive, but a lot of times people, you know, they'll come visit me and they're like, great, where are these people coming from? Why are they leaving trash in front of my house? Why are they saying, and there was a time when I said, oh, you know, maybe I could try to coexist with it. And now I'm kind of sick of it. You know, I'm on my 10th year here, and no one's talking about what needs to be taken away. What do you cut out? Okay, there are things that you need to cut out first before you can start adding things in to replace it. You know, I'm not hearing that.
Well,
and that kind of bothers me a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to ask, because again, not a real estate expert, is how do you have affordable housing next to housing that are purchased by owners, and you know we want that value of the housing to go up? How do they exist together? You know, I don't understand.
Well, let me talk about both of those if I could briefly. So, you know, I kind of have a long relationship with the city of Lynn. It's not necessarily as deep as I'd like it to be, but when I served in the House, it just happened that Rep. Clancy sat next to me and Rep. Hayward sat in front of me. It was just sort of a coincidence, and the three of us all came in the same year. And I started learning about Lynn through that relationship. And I've continued to be involved with various things in the city over time. Obviously, I know Mayor Kennedy and Clancy. And I have been involved in supporting the Blue Line for many years. MAPC is a strong supporter of the Blue Line extension. Lord only knows when we're going to get to it, but it's always on our list. And as long as I've been involved with Lynn, especially in recent years, obviously not going back all the way, people mention the homeless shelter. It's impossible for MAPC. You folks will do what you want to do, because these decisions are not ours. These decisions are the people of the city of Lynn, the councilors, the mayor, maybe the chamber, various others. But we don't support eliminating homeless shelters. There are homeless shelters all over downtown Boston. Nobody knows. It's 90% management. I don't know your homeless shelter. I haven't talked to the owners about management. but I can tell you from the experience I have had in cities all over Massachusetts, it is a management question 9 times out of 10. The issues that I keep hearing about the homeless shelter can be resolved if the shelter is well run. If it isn't, they won't be resolved. However, we have a burgeoning homeless population in Massachusetts. You add higher rents to a high unemployment situation, you're going to have more homeless people. It's pretty simple math. And the numbers are going up dramatically all over Massachusetts. All over Massachusetts. So that's our feeling about the homeless shelter, and we are willing to have further conversations about it from a management perspective, but we ourselves will not recommend eliminating it. On the issue of affordable housing next to housing where wealthy people live, kind of a funny thing happened on the way to modern America, which is that low-income people and rich people live next to each other all the time, except only in the most successful communities. It's just everywhere. We have most of the affordable housing programs in the state now require that you have usually 20% affordable units. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, depending upon the program. And there's one simple rule. The units need to look the same. And the developer will come in and say, oh, well, I think I'd like to cut corners on these affordable units here or here. Or you know what, I think they should all go in that corner over there, kind of looking at the back. And the answer is no, they have to look the same. You can't tell the difference. If you stick to that rule, lower income people and wealthier people live next to each other in successful cities all over America and all over the world. Again, to a large degree, it's a management question. Affordable housing units, if they are in the proper concentration, not necessarily if they're 80%, but if they are in the proper concentration, they do not harm the property values of the other units. And in fact, because very frequently affordable housing is used as a way to eliminate a blighted building, they can sometimes enhance the property values of the market units. It goes back to the displacement issue that was indicated earlier. We at MAPC strongly support growth. We strongly support development. We strongly support having a residential base in any downtown because that creates more customers, more traffic, more liveliness, etc., safer environment. But we do have to recognize that if there is growing development pressure, there will be displacement and gentrification. You probably can't get rid of it all, but you can limit it. You can limit that displacement and gentrification. And one of those ways is to say that if it's properly balanced, lower or middle income people can live near wealthier people. It happens all the time.
So I'm gonna, oops.
Quick time check, it's 7:43, and I know there's a city council meeting tonight, and we also did say the end time is 8 o'clock, so we do have time for a few more questions and discussion, but I just wanted to do that.
Let's see how many people still want to.
Actually, that's a good idea.
These two, and then a reprise from the gentleman.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to just comment, the last young man, that he's wise beyond his years about taking things away. Money makes the world go around, and I have a lot of respect for Dr. Bluestone. Lynn is economically not growing, okay, in the residential capacity. The diversity is a very positive thing, but according to Dr. Bluestone, Lynn has 400% the time, the number of welfare and low-income housing of other communities across the Commonwealth. And nobody builds new apartments or renovates condos to rent to low-income housing. And so that's basically the stagnation here is, and when the gentleman said that you have to start taking things away, we don't advocate moving somebody else out, but through zoning or whatever, there should be a limit to the amount of nonprofits that come into the city of Lynn in the low housing development, because you aren't going to get market Boston rates. You're not going to get any apartment rates. I don't know the last time an apartment was even built in Lynn for $1,800, $2,000 a month in rent. So I hope that some of your suggestions are, instead of saying you have to do this and you have to do that, in adding things, I think you have to say you have to stop encouraging the negative aspects in Lynn, because nothing's happened for a very long time. There was a spurt in downtown with the condos, and it was a great idea, but as you can hear, it's very difficult to sell the properties now because there just aren't people that, even if they had the financing, there aren't people out there that can afford it just because of the economic demographics.
I think there was one other, yes, sir.
I want to, this meeting tonight is really about the downtown, so I want to keep mine more focused. You had commented a minute ago, and I am in the profession, you came in late, but I am a professional real estate broker. We do commercial real estate. I've been doing it my whole life. We do development as well. We've done nothing in the last 5 years because nobody else has either, but things are coming off. And I wanted to point to Mark's comment about doing the world by the numbers, which is how we look at the world. And, you know, you have a zoning code that works here. You have this many square feet of land. You can put this size building. You can create this number of units. You have this amount of parking set aside, for example, et cetera, et cetera. What we have in downtown Lynn, and I don't think we really knew a whole lot about what we were doing back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, because we never had these urban renewal programs. We never really needed them. There was a fire that would burn down most of the downtown. They'd rebuild it. We never had zoning in Lynn until 1926. I happen to think that Lynn, and I've been a bunch of different places that I've lived, is a very attractive community. I think they did a very credible job, and they had no requirements. A lot of these buildings are very special, and this isn't the only community that has it. So it wasn't a guiding light that there was a plan that made this happen. But what we have in downtown Lynn today is we converted a lot of these mill buildings that lost jobs to elderly housing. And as David pointed out a minute ago, I'm just doing some mental math real quick. Within a couple of blocks of where we sit right now, the Vamp building, for example, is 485 units. The Daly building is 185. There's the building on Union Street, which is about 120. The one on the Olympia Towers, the one on the corner of Blake Street, and when you add them up, I'm guessing it's about 1,500 units. Folks that live in those buildings and have virtually zero disposable income, who because of their age and security issues don't even like leaving the building. And it's terrible on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's an overwhelming number of housing units as opposed to the folks that have moved into these condominiums over the past few years. And we have a very finite area. I don't know how many acres it is, but we've done some of those calculations and how many buildings fall in there. But there's very few opportunities for redevelopment. And when you really get to the ground, how many more units could you build that you could turn if you wanted to use the state's levels of between 15 and 25%, depending on which code you're looking at. If you made those 1,500 units of low-income housing 20%, you'd have to develop 7,500 units of market rate housing. And I don't think there's more than 500 to 800 or somewhere in that number, not including the ones that were most recently done. So they're skewed very, very strongly to units that don't have disposable income. You know, we sell properties, people go in, they need to make the numbers work. They got to call their local banker to make this deal work. It's all done by the numbers, and if you don't have the disposable income, I think all of us would love to see a Nordstrom in downtown Lynn. It's not going to happen. You know, and whoever made the comment, if you live in Ward 1 in Lynn right now, not because you don't want to come into downtown Lynn, although that may be the case with a number of individuals, it's very convenient to drive to the North Shore Mall, or now to the Marketplace in Lynnfield. Or if you're in West Lynn, it's very convenient to drive to Square One in Saugus. It's very convenient, and you've got 150 stores under one roof. We need income in this city. We need folks that have disposable income, that can go to these businesses, that can spend money, back to this gentleman's point a minute ago, that can create jobs. And by the way, I recommend reading the story about how Apple did not build the iPhone in the United States. What a story. And this is what we're going to be dealing with for the next 50 years. You need to change the glass, and you have 3 days to do it, and they did it. You know, they had people working 24/7. You know, you couldn't do that here. So very interesting stuff. But narrowing this down to downtown Lynn, we've got 1,500 units, I'm guessing, but somewhere in that number, of folks that have no disposable income. They can't even go to a local, sub shop to get a submarine. And that's fundamentally, when you look at a certain area and you're going to locate a store, people need to know that they can do, if it's a certain size building and it's a retail building, it's going to do $200 a square foot. If it's a CVS, they're going to do $1,000 a square foot, for example. And they need to know that that income, that population can support that kind of development.
Can I ask you a question as a real estate developer?
We're down to 2 grocery stores in a community of 90,000 people.
Well, we're getting another.
That's unbelievable.
Because the government's doing it for them.
Well, I'm just saying that
It's getting back to this
it's back to Mark's
generational
comment
story.
about how you do the
The
world by the numbers.
the non-profits have taken over the private sector. If you have 150 non-profits in Lynn, why do you have to get a job? Because it's to this gentleman's point. The non-profits and the government has taken away the private sector in the city. What this gentleman said, we need to cut that off at its neck and bring in private farming.
As a real estate developer, can you briefly, like 2 minutes, say, since 1984, since half of Lynn downtown burned down, we've only had the community college built. All of that Washington Street land is vacant. Beacon Chevrolet, which didn't burn, maybe, it's still vacant.
You'll be pleased to know it's under contract.
I heard that recently, but it took 30 years. I mean, why does it take so long to develop parcels in Lynn?
It's a long, long answer. Again, this is the downtown Lynn, but there's a lot of reasons for it, and it goes back to the highway system. There's all kinds of things that have happened post-World War II that made cities like this. This was the economic capital powerhouse of the North Shore. It was the largest city north of Boston, between here and Montreal, for a very short period of time. Pico Mills in Salem, for example, was one of the largest buildings in the world for about 8 years and then failed. You know, they moved all of those folks down south and, the cotton industry. So, but we're really dealing with downtown, and presently we have a overabundance of folks that don't have disposable income. And to make a viable economy, you have to have disposable income. You have to have people that have jobs, not transfer payments. You need to have people that, we've talked about in these meetings that you need to have zoning that people understand very simply. You don't jump through all of these meetings to figure out what you can do. It should be very simple.
And that's recommended.
So,
It's recommended in here.
not to cut this conversation off, we can certainly continue it after 8 o'clock, but I know some folks do need to leave soon, and I want to turn to them quickly to make comments or whatever you wanted to do.
Real quick, it was brought up that we don't have a lot of people with disposable income. I'm a teacher, so I don't have a ton of it myself, and I'd like to spend as much of it in Lynn as I can. But how do we get more people with disposable income downtown? Whether they live downtown or not, kids want to go where it's cool. Kids have more disposable income than adults, even though sometimes they shouldn't be spending it. And if we can get them to come downtown, that will pick all of us up. We need to make downtown a welcoming place for kids so they don't leave Lynn when they grow up. We need better public transportation because many of them don't drive. We need the Blue Line or something coming along the Orange Line through Saugus. And I just wanted to make that point. And also, no disrespect, but I really don't want a Nordstrom's.
Did you have a comment? Really quick? Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to piggyback, I can't help it, I wanted to piggyback off what Seth just said really quickly, that I think that even though that there are a lot of nonprofits that are serving a lot of people in need, that's also because we have a lot of people in need. So I see it as like a cycle really, because although we don't want to perhaps enable people to, lean on things, if they don't need to, there's a lot of people who do need help, and that kind of comes in an urban setting. But when Seth was just saying about like young people, I've worked with a lot of youth in the city, like volunteering, and a lot of the youth in the community are very bright and they're doing amazing things. And I do think if they feel like they want to stay in Lynn, that really is, as you were saying, a strong, or someone was saying over here, a strong group to try to attract. Because when I said fun,
I thought of that, for example. My parents told me, you know, when they grew up in Lynn, they could go to the movies in Lynn. If I want to go to the movies in Lynn, I can't. So I have to go to Revere or Danvers or wherever. I just think that the young people, if we can encourage them to stay, I understand like the older people are in the situation that they're in, but I would hope to see that if some of these younger people that are going to school and doing well stay here, then over time you'll see that there are people with disposable income. But I feel like you can't help but to recognize that there are a lot of people in need, because right now a lot of people are hurting, and we can't like just ignore that either.
And I think also, just to piggyback off what you said, we did actually meet with a number of the nonprofits and government agencies that are operating in Lynn, and I would just sort of challenge the idea that they're necessarily a problem. They may be some, you know, I think every aspect of things could be part of the problem, part of the solution, but I think absolutely to the point that was just made, the Food Project, Raw Artworks, there's so many amazing organizations that are really actually making downtown Lynn very vibrant, and they happen to be nonprofits.
I would say one more thing if I could, and then I'll shut up for the night. But so there are about 40 recommendations in this draft plan, and my guess is when we get, you know, we synthesize the information from this meeting, and some folks will send us emails. I hope folks on green space and lights and a variety of other things. Maybe we'll have 45 or 50 recommendations. I don't know. And you know what? Some of them are going to be controversial. There are zoning recommendations. There's the ever-present issue of affordable housing, nonprofit-owned housing and services in the community. There are controversial recommendations in here. We haven't shied away from them. We put them down. All we have to do is put them down. You folks have to decide whether you're doing them. Other than those, probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the recommendations in here are not controversial. They don't hit on any deep, difficult social issues. And this gets back to one of the things that people were saying earlier. I think this gentleman here is like, why are we stuck? And one person said, well, we have to have a plan. So maybe now you have a plan. You know what? You've had a plan before. We like to think this is a better plan. But you've got a plan. The next thing you've got to do is find 3 things you want to do this year and do them. Find 5 things you want to do next year and do them. It's like you need to have the big framework, but you also need to break the pieces off. Maybe go with the low-hanging fruit first and actually get them done. And if the local organizations, the business community, maybe some of the nonprofit institutions, city council, the mayor, they can agree on some small, doable set of things, then you can actually get unstuck. You know, it's kind of true. There's been a lot of progress in Beverly. There's been a lot of progress in Salem. There's been a ton of progress in Boston, although it's come with a lot of problems, believe me.
International city.
Yeah, that's right. It's a different kind of thing. But if you look back before the years of progress in a place like Salem, for example, well, things weren't necessarily all that different from what you see here. And people were saying they were stuck, and with a little leadership, a little creativity, 1 or 2 things fall in the right direction, they've been able to move off the dime. And we'll stick with you on that. We'll help with the little work on the little things.